Welcome to the third day of my adventure of learning Protoss. So this time I take a closer look at building placement and building Wall-Offs. This is something I haven't put too much thought into, as I'm normally a Zerg player and Zergs don't need Wall-Offs or don't want them, because Zerg armies are especially effective when they can surround enemies. And this is the reason why as Protoss we have to build Wall-Offs to protect us against Zergling attacks in the early game. Let's start with taking a look at the probably most often used Wall-Off. It's a Gateway Cybercore Wall-Off at your main base ramp. This is a small ramp, that's important. I don't think there are any maps, or have ever been any maps, where you don't have a small ramp, or at least a small choke at your main base. This is pretty much necessary to allow counterplay to early game cheese like a 12 pool. So the main base Wall-Off should be possible to complete before a 12 pool arrives. But let's move on to the lower ramp Wall-Off. So those are more complicated as they are map dependent, as the sizes of the ramp also vary dependent on the map playing on. Additionally, we now have in-base naturals again, which makes the lower ramp on a few maps your third base Wall-Off, which in some cases might not even be needed or even wanted. Now when we take a look at this Wall-Off on Orbital Shipyard in particular, we can Wall-Off pretty much with 2 pylons and 3 standard size buildings, pretty much gateways, forges, Cybercore, Stargate. They are pretty much all the same size, so it doesn't really matter what buildings they are, at least it's one of these 3x3 buildings. When it comes to defending the Wall-Off, we should always have the Zealot, obviously, that blocks the little gap we leave. And maybe eventually some photon cannons behind the Wall-Off that help us protect the wall. In addition to the photon overcharge, obviously, which we can use on our pylons in the Wall-Off. Now moving on to the next map. Dust Towers is another one of these maps that has an in-base natural, which allows us to protect the natural as well as the main base with the standard Gateway Cybercore Wall-Off at our small main base ramp. But as a downside on this map, we have pretty much a very wide ramp that leads from our third base down to our fourth base, so it isn't that easy to wall that off in time. There are possibilities. I have 2 variations on this map. So the first variation you're seeing here is pretty much a 2 pylon Wall-Off, but it has a little downside as we have a very small gap that can be blocked by a Zealot that doesn't allow to move bigger units through it. So Stalkers and Immortals can't move through this gap, which makes it pretty much just for early defense, mid to early defense, and then we have to destroy one of our pylons and Wall-Off differently. Variation 2 is pretty much when you take your third base earlier and we are neglecting the ramp at the third base completely and just build a semi-Wall-Off that allows us to protect our third base but pretty much isn't the best Wall-Off. But we at least have 2 gateways, 2 pylons for photon overcharge, and a long gap between those 2 gateways, which possibly can be used to protect ranged units from getting surrounded. Moving on to Central Protocol. So this is the only map in the current map pool that doesn't have a main base ramp, but it still has a small choke and can be walled off exactly the same as a ramp would be walled off. What makes this and the next map special is the possibility to wall off the natural ramp with a pylon, a gateway and a cybercore. Pretty much a pylon and 2 standard buildings. So it might be wise to just take this as your quote-unquote main base wall-off and just directly go to the natural ramp, wall it off with your first pylon, first gateway and a cybercore. So you have your natural protected as pretty much as if it would be an in-base natural. The only disadvantage you get from that is that your pylon is more exposed than it would be at choke or main base ramp. But I think the advantages outweigh the disadvantage. I won't even try to pronounce the name of this map, but what I can say is it has a standard ramp at the main base, so it can be walled off with a gateway cybercore. But natural ramp is pretty much interesting, I would say, as the wall-off I use pretty much includes the nexus into the wall-off, and other than that has a 3 standard building requirement and at least 2 pylons. So it is a kind of an interesting wall-off, but you get used to it, I think. Regarding the wall-off on Ruins of Seras, the only thing that's special is the natural wall-off, which includes a pylon that isn't directly part of the wall, but rather placed further back to allow 2 standard buildings go in front of it. So that's pretty much it, so there's nothing much more to say about that, so let's just move on to the last and probably most hated maps amongst Protoss players. So this map, Crest, is pretty much a disaster in terms of natural defense, as it has either 2 ramps to wall off or going with a semi wall off at the natural, which pretty much leaves you open to early game aggression. So my tip is to just veto this map. Yeah, that's about it from me, so I hope anyone could learn something, and thanks for watching.